Major funding for these broadcasts is made possible by grants from Chase Commercial Term Lending and New York Community Bank, M&T Bank, Perfect Building Maintenance, Capital One Bank, the Wyckoff Group, Greenberg Traurig. Additional funding is provided by grants from AKA Hotels, Corman Communities, Aerial Property Advisors, AVR Realty Company, Bank of America Merrill Lynch, Bank Leumi USA, Briarwood Organization, CBRE, Colliers International NYC, CPEX Real Estate Services, Cushman & Wakefield, Customers Bank, DDG, Dime Savings Bank of Williamsburg, Douglaston Development Levine Builders, Fisher Brothers, First Nationwide Title Agency, Flushing Bank, Foley & Lardner, Friedman LLP, Gemini Real Estate Advisors, HAP Investment Developers, Herrick Feinstein, Investors Bank, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, James Orphanides, Chairman USRealty.com, John Katsimides, Red Apple Group, Kilroy Architectural Windows, New York's Window Company, Madison Realty Capital, Massey-Knackle Realty Services, Matone Group, Mercantile Commerce Bank, Meridian Capital Group, Newmark Grubb Knight Frank, New Banks, MHP Real Estate Services, People's United Bank, SJP Properties, Sterling National Bank, Sterling & Sterling, Stonehenge Partners, TD Bank, Terra CRG, The Continuum Company, CUNY TV Foundation, The Moynihan Group, Urban American, and These Friends.
New York City has a crisis, and the crisis is there's not enough affordable housing in New York City. And where can we build it? There's not enough land, there's not enough space, there's not enough money, there's a variety of problems. But I don't know the answers. So I've assembled with my buddy, the executive producer of the show, Chuck Brass, today, a group of individuals who can tell people what's happening in affordable housing, how they might be able to find an affordable housing, and all the different discussions on that. I'm very lucky to have Gary Rodney, who is the president of the New York City Housing Development Corporation, Dan Moritz, who is a principal at the Arker companies, Eli Weiss, who's director of Joy Construction, and last but not least, as I said, the man responsible for bringing this group together, Chuck Brass, who is a principal at Forsyth Street Advisors.
Advisors, right.
And the former president of the New York City Housing Development Corporation. I should also preface that with the exception of Dan, this is the Alumni Association of HDC. Also, for last clarification, 14 years ago when I started the show, the first show of the Stoller Report, I had a show on affordable housing, and it hasn't changed much, and one of my guests was Chuck Brass, live from Charlotte's Kosher Restaurant at the Sony Center.
We had a little table in the back. You could hear them dropping the dishes, clearing the tables.
That was Dan's bar mitzvah.
Okay, Chucky, so what has changed in 14 years in affordable housing?
That's a good question. I think what's changed is we have a more mature industry. The programs that are around today are very similar to the ones that were in effect then, but that was really the very beginning of, certainly with regard to the programs that HDC runs. We were just creating them and starting them.
You know, you could go up to the Bronx and find land that was owned by the city. You could get the land for $1 or for very minimal amounts. You went in, that's when Harlem, when Jeff Levine built the affordable co-op on 116th Street. You know, this was a different time. Today, we don't have that situation. So here, I have to look at the two developers over here. Why does a developer, I know you're very altruistic, you want to help the estate, why do you become an affordable housing? First you, and then Mr. Weiss.
Sure. I mean, I would say becoming an affordable housing developer, you're in a market that is essentially market proof. It's consistent in good times, it's consistent in bad times. You're never going to have a project that is a home run, but you're going to do very well with constant projects, singles type of projects, and it's a good consistent business. And we always have a high demand for our apartments.
You don't have a vacancy. I mean,
we run under 1% vacancy, and when we open up a new building, we get tens of thousands of applications for 100 apartments.
Let's talk about that. Eli, you were saying just prior to the show that you're building a building in Crown Heights.
Correct.
Tell me a little bit about it, how you found the land, and how much of the building is affordable, and
Sure.
and then the lottery system, which I think is very important to discuss.
Sure. So the site that we're talking about is on Franklin Avenue, and the building is actually called Elliot J. Hobs Garden. Elliot Hobs was a banker at J.P. Morgan Chase for many years, who was a real pillar in the affordable housing industry and a great person and a great professional. He unfortunately passed away 2 years ago, and my partners and I, we renamed the building in honor of Elliot. The building is 93 units. It's essentially an 80-20. However, the 80...
Explain, no more inside baseball. Explain to my audience what an 80-20 is.
Sure. 80% of the units are middle income, so they're set with rents up to 130% of New York City's area median income.
And what is New York City's area median?
New York City's area median income for a family of four is about $85,000.
So it's 85,000 at 135 means it's like 112,000.
That's right, and the rents are set right
For
for a
family
family
of
of four. The rents are set at 130% of AMI, but people who could make up to 175% of AMI are also eligible to live in that building. So you have 80% of the units set for middle income tenants, as I just described, and then 20% at people who are considered low income, which are people who earn 40 or 50% of that 80% number.
Which is probably between 18 to 27,000, I think, something in that range. So on both sides of the 93 apartments, is there a lottery for all of them?
There is. There's a lottery for all of the units. The lottery is something that's set up that you work in conjunction with HDC. There's a very sophisticated and talented marketing staff at HDC, so starting about a year before you anticipate occupancy, you set up a meeting with HDC to discuss the marketing guidelines for the building, the timing of the...
So since you're discussing, I want Gary to talk about that. What do you do over there?
On the marketing end, they'll sit down with the developer staff, in this case Eli and his team. We'll go through the marketing materials. We'll go through kind of the ad that will be placed in the newspaper. We'll also discuss kind of what the income ranges are that will be allowed for each unit type.
And when do you put the ad in the newspaper, and when does it go on the website that the apartments are going to...
6 to 8 months prior to TCO.
About 6 to 8 months before you're actually ready to have people move in.
Now, Eli said before, you had how many applications for the...
Roughly 51,000 for the 93 units.
51,000, so it's truly like winning a lottery. But part of the problem is the income bands. If certain people have said to me, I could qualify, but if I make $20 more than that income band, I'm out. What is that?
That has to do with how we structure the financing for the deal. So in Eli's case, we have 20% of the building that are at lower income levels. 80% are at higher income levels, but as he described, we try to give him a band to work with. So you don't have so much of an issue with somebody who's slightly over. However, the rules are the rules, and we do need to kind of stick within those income guidelines, otherwise it throws our...
Now here is the question. When somebody gets one of these, wins the lottery for one of these 93 apartments, how long are they allowed to be in that apartment?
As long as they want to. So once
let's say that person at this time is just starting their career and their business career, and they're earning X dollars, and their world changes and their business does well. They're going to be in that. They are protected for life for that apartment.
Through rent stabilization, they're typically, well, these buildings are always subject to rent stabilization, and therefore they're able to get a lease renewal as of right, or whatever the rent guidelines board approves. Eventually, in some cases, the restrictions may fade away, but that's very far off in the distant future.
Someone could be moving into your building, or someone could be moving into an 80-20 in Manhattan.
Correct.
You know, which would have 20% affordable or even different rates, and they could be protected for the rest of their life at this market rate, which now reduces the possibility of, as I was saying, the increased number of people moving into the city.
But I think that's something we would all want to see. I think that providing somebody with an affordable and quality home at the time when they need it and their income qualified, you want to see that. You'd like to think that that home was part of the platform that allowed them to do better, that allowed them to focus on their professional life, that helped them get that. And you don't want to see the two factors, their sort of success.
You don't want to penalize somebody.
Exactly.
I'm not disagreeing. I'm just trying to go through all the philosophies over here. Now,
but there is an argument to be said that if someone gets an affordable apartment and they're paying $800 a month, and 5 years, 10 years later they're making $400,000 a year, that it would be better if that apartment could turn over so that it could give an opportunity to somebody else. But that's not the way the law works in New York.
Here's my question. You had this land. You could have made this building 100% market rate.
Correct.
Why do you build it as an affordable housing?
There's a combination of reasons. Number one, at the time when we bought the land, the market there wasn't as robust and strong as it is today. Number two, real estate development in New York is driven by, especially new construction, by tax abatement. Part of securing a long-term tax abatement on the site would be to put an affordable component on the site anyway. And at the time, the rents that I was describing, the middle income rents, those 130% of AMA rents, weren't really that far off from the
market rate.
So when you combine that with the plethora of sort of financing goodies that go along with working with a government program, it made sense.
Chuck, I mean, as I said, you were president of HDC, you were with CPC, you've been involved with all these things. Today, you're more of an advisor to many companies with regard to structuring and the finance. Who's coming to you? You know, are regular developers are coming to you for advice on this type of market?
Well, we have all kinds of clients coming to us. We have a lot of...
Good, the bad, and the ugly?
Yes, we try and weed out the ugly, but... and the not so, but we try and separate the bad from the not so bad. So almost anybody is redeemable. We can make anybody look good. So at least we try to think so. But we have, for example, in our 80-20, we do some consulting for developers who are doing 80-20 projects. The ones who are established and have been doing it for a while, who did it back even when HDC was doing 80-20s, they don't come to us. But there's a whole new cadre of developers who either have no experience developing, very little experience, or they were condo developers, but for some reason they own a site where they feel that they either have to do 80-20, they want it, or they want to, and they need advice on, because the rules are very complicated.
So let me throw my initial question to all of you, and each one see who wants to pick it up. We have, the amount of developable land has been diminished over here. We don't have that much land in the New York City, in the report, which is on your website. Great, go to nychdc.com. There's a report on the housing
New York.
The housing of New York. Where can we build? How can we increase the number of units? I know that you've done work in preservation, in a number of preservation deals. We have projects today where there's large potential affordable is Hunters Point, the Domino deal, the Hallett's Point, East New York, certain parts of the Bronx, even in Manhattan, or maybe Washington Heights if we build up. Where can we find the affordable housing, and how do we build more affordable housing? Who wants to try to answer that question?
The biggest issue, like you said today, is finding land to build affordable housing, and HGC and HPD have great programs available to help us with the tools we need to build new construction. But the challenge again for us is finding land that fits into the bucket.
So let's say we find the land. Can't we, through certain programs or other opportunities like the inclusionary housing program, which gives certain people, we're also doing affordable housing for supportive housing. We're doing it for homeless people. We're having all these type of things. If we build higher, we can possibly get more apartments.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
I think we have to get more creative. As you mentioned before, that in different neighborhoods there were swaths of land available. Now it's not so much. So we have to build taller, we have to build a little bit denser, and we have to kind of think about locations that weren't the #1 spots that everybody went to. But I think there would actually still be good locations. And I'll also say kind of building a little bit bigger isn't putting a 45-story building in Crown Heights.
Sure.
It could be the difference of going from a 6 or 7-story building to maybe 8 or 9. And, so we can I think there are plenty of opportunities there. The fact that we've got a good team on the administration side working together, both from city planning, HPD, HDC. Maybe there's going to be some additional possibilities in building on NYCHA land.
Let's talk about the NYCHA land. NYCHA land, for my audience, is the New York City Housing Authority land, sometimes also known as the projects. But a lot of the NYCHA land has parking, has density possibilities, and where you can take that land, maybe you can, to take over the parking, maybe you can build above ground parking, structured parking, and then you can have housing over there. And in many of these NYCHA locations, these are the city is gentrified very well, so it's a big difference. So the NYCHA is a good possibility. Have you pursued NYCHA?
I have not, but I've looked at the RFPs. Typically, the process is a request for a proposal for a NYCHA piece of property. So far, I've not submitted for one. I've looked at them. They're fairly complicated. It's sort of like going back to the inclusionary. Many times, and the programs of HDC and HPD are great, but in today's market, when things move so quickly in terms of land and making execution decisions, the timing of the programs and getting in and making sure that you're going to secure a piece of property and you're spending time and focus, it doesn't move fast enough.
Chuck, would you explain what inclusionary housing means?
Sure. Inclusionary housing is basically, under the zoning, there may be a certain, what's called a floor area ratio, meaning if a lot is a certain size, you can build a building with 5 times the square foot. For example, a 10,000 square foot lot, you could build a 50,000 square foot lot. In exchange for building affordable housing under the inclusionary housing program, the city might let you build a 60,000 square foot building instead of a 50,000 square foot building.
So why explain?
But you'd have to set aside a portion of the units for people at a lower rent.
And they are on-site or off-site today?
In most of the inclusionary programs, they have to be on-site. There are a couple, there's the original inclusionary program, there is still one where you could do off-site. So
now there's the question of, and my audience always likes to know, when somebody builds a building, you're building this 93-unit development, and Arkers have always been very involved in preservation. I know a lot in Far Rockaway.
Both, yeah.
And new buildings. Are the units different for the 20% of the units, or are they the same?
So in the buildings that we're building, they're the same, mostly because the entire building is under an affordable program and go through a design guideline by HPD and HDC. So the units are exactly the same. You can't tell the difference between any of the units. They're dispersed equally throughout all of the building. There's no difference between the amenities. There's no separate lobbies. This is truly, programmatic affordable housing that you're, from the beginning, from everything from the financing to the design, working in conjunction with the government agency.
What about the other discussion where, there are certain apartments within a 80-20, which is open market, any rent that you can get, and then there's 20%, which is the affordable component before. Are there any differences in those apartments?
Very minor. It may be the difference between the countertops or things like that, but in the appliance package. But for the most part, the unit sizes, they're very similar. They're supposed to be proportional across the building in terms of if whatever number of 1-bedrooms and 2-bedrooms or studios, you have to have an equal percentage of the low income.
In certain instances, the affordable apartments may actually be better than the market rate apartments, because there are certain design guidelines that the city has for those affordable apartments, which make them actually be larger than what a developer
correct.
may
Now,
want for
how many
a market
years?
rate apartment with
How
a
many
similar-
years do these apartments have to remain affordable?
Depending on which program you're referring to, in the case of the 80/20s, it's usually for the length of our mortgage, or I should say the tax abatement, so it can go out 30 years, sometimes a little bit longer. In the case of the inclusionary deals that Chuck was describing earlier, those are usually done in perpetuity, because once your building is done, is built, you've received that extra benefit.
But Dan was trying to say prior to the show, you know, you're not making, you're not going for home runs, you're going for singles. How could you make a profit for 20 years when the rents are so low? I understand the taxes are lower, but what else is lower?
Well, basically, as an affordable housing developer, we're making a trade in exchange for the upside on rents and upside in increase in valuation because of the cap on our rents. We make a fee up front in exchange for developing affordable housing, and that's typically about 10% of the total development cost. And so it's a trade-off in exchange for
And then you get a
that.
management fee also.
Right, we continue to manage the properties, we manage everything that we own. But it's a trade-off, you know, you're trading away the future upside.
What happens what we call a HAP contract? People are buying HAP buildings. Why do developers buy HAP buildings, and explain what a HAP building is?
Well, I'll jump in, I guess, first, because I used to live this every day for a very long time. A HAP contract is a housing assistance payment contract from the federal government. It's essentially, it's a Section 8. So the Section 8 contract is with the building, and typically HUD will cover approximately 70% of your rent.
So if the tenant really can't afford, if the rent is $1,200, that's $1,000, let's use it, the government HUD will give $700 towards it, and the individual will take $300.
Yes. And in some cases, if the individual can't afford to pay the $300, sometimes the HUD will cover a little bit more. That varies on building by building.
So why do people buy HAP contract deals?
Stable income. It's very steady income.
I have a guaranteed
it's
check every month from Uncle Sam.
Right, it's a
most of the
credit-worthy
rent.
tenant. You have a 70% master lease to Uncle Sam.
Exactly. You're basically underwriting the federal government as opposed to underwriting tenants.
Now, but a number of these HAP buildings are trying to become out of the HAP program. There have been discussions.
They have, without getting too complicated, basically if you have a contract with HUD for Section 8 and you're in a really good market area, you can actually go to HUD and say, I have a choice to opt out of the program or pay me the market rent if you want to keep these buildings affordable. So in that case, if you're paying $1,000 a month, but you're really in Manhattan or even in certain other neighborhoods that are now trendy where market rents are very high, HUD will pay you $3,000
I
a
remember
month.
the Cherry Street. I remember the deal that Apollo was involved with DVL. You know, the units can go higher.
Right, yes, so the HUD will pay you $3,000 a month if you're in Manhattan, or $4,000 a month.
What happened with
to
the
preserve
Mitchell-Lamas
the
at the
affordable
beginning
housing.
of the century, 10, 12 years ago. This is what was going on with the Mitchell-Lamas. Whether it was Independence Plaza or Waterside Plaza, it was the same concept. These buildings were built at a time where they were working within a government program and the rents were set to some level of affordability, and times changed and the neighborhoods changed, and the owners wanted to opt out of the program.
And in many cases, they were creating the market at that point in time.
That's right.
So that's part of the reason for these government programs. It helps to incentivize folks like Eli and Dan to kind of go into these neighborhoods and actually make it cost-effective and beneficial to build these.
And HUD doesn't want to lose these units, so that's why they're willing to pay the market rent in order to keep the units affordable. Because a lot of these projects are large, a lot of units, and they'd hate to lose all of the
not every
affordable units.
apartment in a HAP contract has to be a HUD apartment.
Generally, it's 90% or more of the units
But
are under the contract.
if the tenant moves out and you can get a market rate tenant, you're allowed?
No, if you sign a new contract, the tenant moves out, then you have to rent to another low-income tenant.
Right.
There's still a regulatory agreement against the...
And how does somebody get into a HAP building? Because I heard about the lottery now. How does somebody get into a building later on?
So it's depending on the program, it's slightly different. In the HAP contract buildings, there's a waiting list. And, you know, the owner of that building or the management company has to go through the waiting list in the order that they come in.
And the waiting list is then based on the income bands that we discussed earlier.
The HAP contract buildings, they're actually a little bit different. In those buildings, the maximum income is at 80% of the area median income. So that's, you know, just shy of $70,000 for a family.
Right, and it can go basically all the way down to zero because the structure of the HAP contract is that they'll pay 30%, or the tenant will pay 30% of their income towards rent, whatever their income is. So it can be down to zero or it can be up to 80%.
And in the other buildings that, for example, in Eli's middle income project in Crown Heights, he has to go through the lottery system for the first initial rent up. And then after that, he will be able to kind of rent to the open market, so to speak, but it's provided that they meet the income bands that we've established
In
for
the
the
income
property.
bands and so on. What about, there was once something called affordable cooperatives, and you know, we were talking before, Jeff Levine's on 116th Street. What happened to the affordable co-ops?
Well, they're still out there, the ones that were built. It's not an active program that the city has anymore. Really, in the financial recession in 2007 and 8, this was an affordable housing market that actually was affected. We talked about the rental market. Demand is constant, but even in that era,
it became very difficult for the end buyers to get end loans.
No, but here's something right now. I know that there's a building being built on First Avenue by Toll Brothers, and I believe that 20% of the apartments, and it's a condo. So how are they doing affordable condos in the building?
I don't believe that the affordable units will be condominiums. If they're in, they'll be rentals in all likelihood.
Right. What they may do is have a condo for the 20% of the units, which will end up actually being affordable rentals.
It's a method to get a tax abatement.
No, but I understood that they are going to be affordable condos. So somebody is going to be able to get a 400. Yes,
They'll try to sell, right.
Yeah, without knowing the particulars of this exact deal, it could just be an internal cross subsidy where they're agreeing to just sell some units at a lower income to benefit from a tax abatement.
I remember a number of units were built in the Rockaways. These were affordable houses, the 3-family, and the biggest problem is these people couldn't qualify for mortgages.
Right, I think it's an availability issue. You know, as the financial crisis happened, end loans became difficult for anybody. I mean, if you had any K1 income, you couldn't get an end loan. And
Even Ben Bernanke says he can't get a mortgage.
And
so,
now you have an underwriter for end loans looking at a fairly complicated regulatory agreement and a complicated financing structure, and it's just pass.
So, you know, in summation, it sounds like we do have a potential crisis because we have more people. The good part is people want to come to New York. The bad part is there aren't that many apartments, so people are going to have to look at areas where they didn't plan to be before. Maybe there'll be more development in Staten Island.
No, we're always trying.
We're working on it.
Okay.
We just advised the developer building the first 80-20 rental housing project in Staten Island on the side of the old home port.
Oh, nice.
Iron State Development, going to be 800-unit development.
And we're going to break ground in January on a new senior housing project in Staten Island.
And the senior housing
is affordable senior housing.
Is affordable, and it's also based on the lottery, the same concept.
Exactly.
There. But those are available to age 62 and over, I believe.
Correct.
So I think, you know, in my 14th season, Chuck, you were there from day one. Hopefully you'll be there after the 700th show, which we'll do later on in the fall. I'd like to have all of you back, and we'll continue this discussion on affordable housing. I'd like to thank Gary, Dan, Eli, and needless to say, Chuck. Thanks for being here, and I'll see you next week.